Tacitus is one of the greatest writers of the Roman period, and I have a bit of a soft spot for him because he wrote my A-level set text. Let's have a dive into his life and times. Publius Cornelius Tacitus was many things. An orator, he was a fantastic public speaker, which is quite funny because his name, Tacitus, means the quiet one, but he was an amazing public speaker in his own right. He was a great politician, and he was very active in the public life of Rome, and he was a historian, and that is probably what most people have heard of him for. He was born around AD 56 and he died in about 120. We're not entirely certain, but they are the agreed upon dates from historians. He came from an equestrian family, so he wasn't one of the poor, he also wasn't one of the super wealthy. He wasn't a patrician, he wasn't from a senatorial family. His family were in the upper classes, but they were not the super top level. However, he had a good education, he did very well for himself. He married a woman called Julia Agricola, and she was very important because her father, Julius Agricola, will become very important in Tacitus's life. And as a fairly young man, Domitian was the emperor. Now, Domitian was not a particularly calm and peace-loving emperor. In fact, he had a sort of reign of terror, and it caused a time of crisis. Domitian was quite a brutal emperor, and he took quite a lot of pleasure in murdering quite a lot of the Senate and their surrounding people. He was not a calm emperor, he did not keep things very peaceful in Rome, and so part of the reason that Tacitus is so famous is because of his writings about later emperors who were much calmer, and he has a very positive view of later emperors, or some later emperors, and he has a very negative view of other emperors. However, this is all being mixed up in his early years, his formative years, when he's sort of 30 and onwards, and Domitian played a big part in who Tacitus was. Because he survived the rule of Domitian, he was able to look back on other periods of history with a different view to someone who was writing in Augustus's era, for example. There are several of his works that we want to talk about today. His monographs, his histories, and his annals. I'm going to take you through all of these with the view of analysing one of them in my next video. So the monographs, he wrote 3 major monographs that have survived that we know about on various topics between 98 AD and 102, so within about 4 or 5 years. The first one, De Vita Julii Agricola. Do you remember I said he married a girl called Julia Agricola? Well, this is about her dad, the life of Julius Agricola. The reason Agricola was important is he was one of the generals who was pacifying Britain. And that's why in modern times, especially in Britain, Tacitus is seen as a really important source because he gives us a lot of information about the peoples of Britain. His second was De Origine et Situ Germanorum. This is about the life, the beginnings, and the situation of the German people. Both of these fall into ethnographic history, and that means they tell us about the ethnicities of the people who lived there. And this was a really big thing at this time in Roman writing. They were very interested in where the people they were conquering had originally come from. So Julius Caesar was very interested in this. A lot of people have said because Tacitus has a very sympathetic view of the people being conquered, possibly he himself, or his family at least, were originally from Germany or somewhere on the edges of the Roman Empire. There's no evidence for that, but it is just very interesting that he does have a very sympathetic view of these people whose livelihoods and places are being overtaken by the Romans. His third monograph was Dialogus de Oratoribus. Now that is a dialogue about oratory, about giving public speeches. These all have shortened names, so the first one is called the Agricola often, the second one is called the Germania, and the third one is called the Dialogue or the Dialogus. The next surviving work we have of Tacitus is his Histories, and this is published in around 105 AD. It's a history of the year AD 69 to AD 70. Now, it wasn't supposed to be such a small amount. In fact, it wasn't when it was published, but much has been lost. It was supposed to start in 69, which is after the death of Nero, but the original text went all the way through to the assassination of Domitian, which was in 96 AD. So we have lost about 26 years of this history. The bit we do have is very short, but it's very detailed and very rich evidence for the year of the 4 emperors. which starts when Nero is assassinated, the Emperor Nero, in 69, and it talks about the 4 emperors who came in very quick succession in the 1 year following Nero's death. It's a really rich piece of history, and historians particularly find it very useful for what happened in that time period, which can be quite confusing because the events happened so rapidly. Like I said, it was supposed to go up to Domitian's rule, but most of it has been lost. Now this was written in AD 105. Once he'd published this, he then wrote the Annals. The Annals were published in around 117, and this covers the period ab exgessu divi Augusti, from the death of the divine Augustus, which is in 14 AD. So it goes as almost a prequel to the Histories. It goes from AD 14 all the way up to AD 68. Again, parts of it are lost, but far more of the Annals remain than the history. It basically goes from Tiberius's reign all the way through to Nero. The whole text is about 16 books long. In comparison, the Histories should have been about 14, scholars think. What we have of the Annals takes place over 16 books. We know there were at least 16. The last one, we're missing the last half of it, or the last part of it at least. We don't know if there was a 17th, but most scholars think 16 books of the Annals. There are bits, so books 6 and 7 I think are missing completely. Half of book 5 is missing, bits of book 11 are missing. We have bits that are missing, unfortunately, but it's an absolute wonder that so much of it has survived for effectively 1900 years. So we can't be too choosy and too fussy, can we? This is an amazing account of this time period. But this wasn't the end of Tacitus's plans. He had a grand future prepared for himself in that he wanted to continue writing. He wanted to take his histories further and go past the end of that and talk about Nerva and Trajan, who came after Domitian. He also wanted to go back earlier than his Annals and talk about Augustus and even further back to the founding of Rome. Unfortunately, it didn't get that far, and he died before, as far as we know, he could complete any more work. So he had this grand plan to effectively write the entirety of Roman history from the founding of Rome in 753 all the way through to present day when he was alive. The reason Tacitus is so popular is that he has a fantastic style. So first of all, like we talked about before, he has these ethnographic accounts where he gives very sympathetic views of the people who are being conquered by the Romans. This is not necessarily always the case in Roman writers. They don't often give the situation of the peoples who are being conquered. They just celebrate the fact they have been conquered and the Roman Empire has expanded. Tacitus is a little bit different in that he goes very deep into the histories of the people who are being conquered. So for the Britons, he talks about the different tribes. Again, for the Germans, he talks about all the places where they came from and all the skills that they had and how the Romans effectively wiped that out or took advantage of those things in order to expand their empire. I'm not saying that he doesn't agree with expansion, but he has a very humanitarian view of the people who are being conquered. He also has a narrative style to his history. He doesn't just give events one after the other. Sometimes he will zoom in on a very specific event, and he puts them in a chronological order that makes it very interesting and very easy to read. So for example, in my next video, I'm going to be doing an analysis of a part of Tacitus's writing about the Great Fire of Rome, and his description of these accounts is so moving, but it's such a short snapshot of that time. He gives a very quick overview and then he moves on. He has very rapid narration, but he gets into those very deep and detailed single scenes, so you really feel like you have been there. It's a very interesting way of writing history. And he also is very ideological about the emperors. He wants them to be good people. I mean, who wouldn't? They're in charge. But he has a lot to say about the way other people have written about emperors. So he says, Tiberii Gaique et Claudii ac Neronis res Florentibus ipsis ob metum falsae postquam occiderant recintibus odis compositae sunt. This means the histories of Tiberius, Gaius, Claudius, as well as Nero, while they themselves were flourishing, was falsified. So he is talking about the people who used to write about the emperors. He says when Tiberius, Gaius, who is Caligula, Claudius and Nero were alive, the people who were writing the histories falsified the accounts because of fear, on account of fear. So they made it too positive. And after the emperors had died, the histories were composed under recent hatred. So once they died, the opinion went completely the other way. And because they were so close to the events, the historians became very negative about these emperors. And Tacitus carries on to say, Mox Tiberii principatum et cetera, sine era et studio, quorum causus procul habeo. This is his whole point. He says, I plan to relate the rule of Tiberius and the others, so all the other emperors, without anger or zeal, since from those events I am at a distance. So because I have, 100 years between myself and Tiberius, I can have a more detached viewpoint and I'm just going to relate the history. Now, some people would maybe debate how impartial Tacitus stays in his accounts. However, that's his plan. That's what he says he wants to do. We will have a look next time and see what you think about whether he remains impartial or not. And this is what we're going to look at next time. Annals 15.38. It's a fantastic section about the fire of Rome, and we're going to have a look at it next time. So make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss that next week. If you want to be able to read Tacitus and Suetonius and all the other great authors, why not go and watch my free workshop where you can learn Latin in just 1 hour? There's a link in the description below. It's completely free. It's just an hour-long video to give you the basics of Latin grammar and vocabulary so you can start your Latin journey to be able to read Tacitus. You'll also get access to all my free guides, so go and sign up at the link in the description below to learn Latin in just 1 hour. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss my Analysing Tacitus video next time, and I'll see you then on Bambasbat.